Department spending for the next budget year. That measure includes food stamps and nutrition programs for children and senior citizens. And you can see the House debate on C-SPAN right now. Live Senate coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
Will be offered by Reverend Don Duncan, Senior Chaplain of Oklahoma Jail and Prison Ministries and the Chaplain of the Oklahoma County Sheriff's Office.
Let us pray. Father, as we pause to seek your divine guidance, I pray for your presence, wisdom, and divine protection to be bestowed upon each senator, their families, their staffs, and all those who have committed their lives in service to our country. I pray your guidance through eternal principles in all discussions and final decisions. I pray for that which is honorable, both in your sight and in the heart of each citizen. When a conclusion is reached, may peace abide throughout this chamber and throughout this land. We pray this through the name of Jesus. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 16, 2011, to the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will resume consideration of S-782, which is the Economic Development Act. There's 4 hours of debate on the Feinstein and McCain amendments. At about 2 p.m., there will be 2 roll call votes in relation to the Feinstein and McCain amendments. Each amendment will have a 60-vote threshold. Mr. President, I'm happy to see Republicans opening up to what Democrats have been saying all along. Cutting wasteful subsidies to big oil should be on the table if we're going to reduce the deficit. Yesterday, my friend, the senior senator from Tennessee, said he would consider ending taxpayer subsidies for oil companies making record profits. I congratulate my friend, the senior senator from Tennessee. Democrats agree. Handouts like these to companies that make $36 billion in the first quarter of this year alone must be part of the discussion as we get to if we're going to get our fiscal house in order. As we decide where to cut, we'll need to make some tough choices. But not every choice has to be difficult. If we're serious about reducing spending, ending tens of billions in taxpayer giveaways to big oil companies shouldn't be one of the difficult decisions we have to make. And when the other side says the alternative is to end Medicare, slash Medicaid, put millions of seniors at risk, the choice is that much clearer. We cannot take with one hand those who can least afford it and give with the other hand to those who can. Before we end Medicare as we know it, or eliminate Medicaid funding for nursing homes, as the Republicans have proposed, we should cut wasteful spending. During the course of a year, 1 in 5 Americans will be on Medicaid. The cuts Republicans propose affect real people. The elderly man in the nursing home, for example. The child missing her yearly checkup, as an example. The pregnant woman, as an example, whose baby depends on proper prenatal care. Or, for example, the person with a disability who is able to live alone thanks to the helping hand Medicaid provides. And these cuts will affect you too. Cutting Medicaid simply shifts costs. It doesn't lower costs. Each patient who doesn't get the care he needs or she needs from a doctor today will get it tomorrow at 3 times the price in an emergency room. And you and I will foot that bill. The American people have spoken loudly and clearly. They do not want to balance the budget on the backs of seniors, children, and the disabled. I'm glad to see at least one of my Republican colleagues courageously breaking from the pack. Would the chair now announce morning business? Or whatever the day is?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-782, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 38, S-782, a bill to amend the Public Works and Economic Development Act of 1965 to reauthorize that act and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, there will be 4 hours of debate equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees on Amendment number 476, offered by the Senator from California, Mrs. Feinstein, and Amendment number 411, offered by the Senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain.
Mr. President, noting there is no one on the floor, I would ask that a quorum call begin with the time being equally divided.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
I rise to speak on...
Senate is currently in a quorum call.
I ask that the quorum, unanimous consent, that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the Ethanol Subsidy and Tariff Repeal Act, which Senator Coburn and I are offering as an amendment to pending legislation. The other co-sponsors on this amendment are Senator Webb and Senator Collins. This is identical to a bill that we have submitted, and on that bill there are more co-sponsors. They are Coburn, Cardin, Webb, Corker, Lieberman, Collins, Shaheen, Burr, Risch, and Toomey. And so I wanted to have the record straight that this amendment is in response to a bill which we have crafted. On Tuesday, the Senate voted on the proposal. But unfortunately, we saw a process battle, which I spoke to on the floor, which I think overwhelmed in some respects the debate. Now, that is not the case today. There are ongoing negotiations to see if it's possible to put together a solution which can bring all sides together on this amendment that we will be voting on at 2 o'clock. Thus far, we do not have an agreement. However, at least one of our co-sponsors of this has said to me, this is Senator Webb, that he would very much appreciate a straight up or down vote on Coburn-Feinstein so that we know exactly where the Senate stands. It is still possible, even after that cloture vote, that if we can reach a successful conclusion to the negotiation, that we could have another vote and change that. Today, this is really the first vote that the Senate has taken based on the merits of repealing the ethanol subsidy and tariff. And in a nutshell, let me give you the reasons. I know of no other product in the United States of America that has a triple crown of benefits. There is a mandate. Oil companies must buy this ethanol. There is a subsidy. Oil companies are paid for buying this substance. And this substance, known as corn ethanol, is protected by a protective tariff which prevents other nations like Brazil from importing ethanol, which actually has more beneficial environmental effects. As a matter of fact, corn ethanol is the least environmentally proficient ethanol. Everything else is better than corn. Cellulosic is better. Algae is better. Sugar is better. And all kinds of new types of ethanol are being tested. So the bottom line is that we have a triple crown of subsidy, mandate, and protective tariff on the least effective, environmentally sound ethanol there is. Now, more importantly, this is now used to such an extent that it is having a major impact on food commodity prices, and in particular on feed prices. And this is particularly true in the poultry industry, and I will get to that in a few minutes. I do want to thank Senators Klobuchar and Thune for good faith efforts to try to reach a compromise. This compromise, at least from my point of view, must save substantial revenue for the debt and deficit, for the Treasury, and eliminate wasteful ethanol subsidies and tariffs. So these negotiations have been ongoing since Tuesday. We have not yet reached an agreement. And so a vote at 2 o'clock will not end these talks. I'm perfectly willing to continue to talk. But I do think that it is important that we have a clean up or down vote on the Coburn-Feinstein Amendment. The issue at hand is a simple issue. The subsidy given to these oil companies costs taxpayers billions of dollars every year. And the tariff actually has the effect of making us more dependent, not less dependent, but more dependent on foreign oil. Let me explain. In 2005, the ethanol subsidy cost taxpayers $1.5 billion. This year, that number is nearly $6 billion. So it's gone in 6 years from a cost of $1.5 billion to a cost of nearly $6 billion. There's a reason for it. I'll get to that in a moment. Since 2005, the total cost of this subsidy is $22.6 billion. Here is the increase every year: $1.5 billion, 2006, $2.6, 2007, $3.3 billion, 2008, $4.4 billion, 2009, $5.2 billion, 2010, $5.7 billion, and the all-time high in these last 2 years of $5.7 billion. However, it continues to rise, and the proposal that has been made for an extension to 2015 by some would cost another $31 billion. So, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, this is a very, very costly trifecta of benefits. Now, let me be clear. The subsidy is wasteful and duplicative. It does very little to promote the use of ethanol, which oil companies already must use under current law. The renewable fuels standard dictates oil companies to use 14 billion gallons of biofuels this year, 20.5 billion by 2015, and 36 billion by 2022. So you see, this is by law now increasing every year, and it goes from 14 this year, and it more than doubles by 2022, and that doubling is what's going to cost the going to be $36 billion at the cost I indicated. And yet we pay oil companies to follow the law. Now let me speak briefly about the tariff. The 54-cent per gallon tariff on ethanol imports makes our nation actually more dependent on foreign oil. The tariff acts as a trade barrier, placing clean sugarcane ethanol imports from friendly nations at a competitive disadvantage to oil imports from OPEC. This discourages imports of low-carbon ethanol from our allies and leads to more oil and gasoline imports from OPEC countries, which enter the United States tariff-free. So you've got a high tariff on ethanol coming in, and you have a very low tariff on oil. Sugarcane ethanol, which suffers from this tariff, is the lowest carbon fuel that is widely available. So the tariff makes no sense, and it should be repealed. And I believe that that is one thing where there is very strong consensus in this body. The Ethanol Subsidy and Tariff Repeal Act repeals the 45-cent per gallon ethanol use subsidy, known as the volumetric ethanol excise tax credit. People say VETC, and everybody's supposed to know what VETC is. Well, it's the volumetric, by volume, ethanol excise tax credit. And the 54-cent per gallon ethanol tariff is effective July 1. So there are really two in there, two tariffs. Those are two parts of the three-part Triple Crown of government support. Refineries are required to use ethanol under the Renewable Fuel Standard. The subsidy pays them to use that mandated ethanol, and ethanol, again, is protected by a very high tariff. Now, I think we need to address this quickly because the effects are harmful and the costs are great. At highest risk are increased costs for feed, corn, and other food. Today, 39% of the United States corn crop is used to produce ethanol. That's according to the Congressional Research Service. Well over a third of the corn crop is used to produce ethanol. Corn futures reached a record $7.99 a bushel last week. So corn future prices are up 140% over 12 months. Here you can see the rise from $2 in 2005 to 2006, going up over 07, 08, beginning to come down slightly in 09, continues down in 010, and then boom, 2010 to 11, and 2011 to 2012, it has shot up. This is devastating, particularly to poultry farms all over the country, and I'll explain why in a moment. This is devastating to cattle, and this is devastating to food commodity prices as well. And it will continue to go up if we let this continue. The annual average price of corn has risen 225% since 2006. So from here to here, there is a 225% increase in corn prices. Now, does anybody think that's good for this nation? Is it good for farmers who depend on corn feed? I don't think so. Let me give you some examples. The annual feed costs for Foster Farms tripled over the past year, increasing costs by more than $200 million. That's greater than the firm's largest ever annual profit. Zaki Farms, which is a large farm, has lost $35 million over the last 3 years due to increased corn costs. I want to read to you for a moment a summary of the impacts on Zaki Farms. Here's the background. Zaki Farms is a family-owned, vertically integrated producer of quality turkey products for consumers. in the retail and food service markets. The company is 55 years old, but has roots in supplying poultry products to consumers that reach back all the way to 1928, representing 3 generations of commitment to the business. Zacky's employs over 1,000 employees, and supplies approximately 2% of the turkey consumed in the United States. During the past 3+ years, the growing use of corn and ethanol has been nothing less than devastating on Zacky farms. Why? Turkey feed costs represent about 60% of the cost of getting turkey products to the stores for consumers to buy. Corn is roughly 50% of the turkey feed formulation, making corn 1/3 of the cost of a turkey. Soybean meal, usually the second largest ingredient in turkey feed, competes for the same acreage as corn, and consequently the pricing of soybean meal often moves somewhat in tandem with corn. The government is sitting on acres and paying farmers not to plant them, thereby encouraging the rise in cost. I didn't know that we are paying farmers not to plant soybeans. Recent reports show that since 1990, there are essentially no new acres available. Ethanol use of corn is therefore driving up other turkey feed ingredient prices also. The increasing use of corn and ethanol, now nearly 40% of the nation's corn supply, has been a major factor in driving the price of corn from $2 a bushel to $4 to $6, and currently $7.75 a bushel. That's what Zacky is currently paying. This dramatic increase has all occurred since the Q4 of 2006, just what I've been saying. The turkey industry has been unable to pass these cost increases along fast enough to maintain profitability. Now, Mr. President, we were in the caucus on Tuesday, and we heard one senator talk about how a farm has actually collapsed because of these prices in his state, and a second senator reiterate his deep concern about what's happening to the poultry interest in his state. So this just isn't Foster Farms and Zacky Farms, which happen to be in California. It is all over. And then they go into the impacts of corn for ethanol on employees, suppliers, customers, consumers, and family ownership. And they say they have suffered significant losses during the past 3 years. And it is estimated that that's $35 million in losses from 08, 09, and 10, and that their banking relationships have been shattered. After 60 years of banking, the Bank of America told the company to find another bank. In 2008, the company was forced to implement across-the-board salary freezes and other measures to help control these costs. Turkey prices have jumped dramatically and will continue to increase. In other words, so that the market is becoming such that turkey is going to become an endangered species, particularly in a down market. And that they've stopped promotions such as the Thanksgiving free turkey with the purchase of a certain dollar amount, and it goes on and on. So it's a very serious issue. Let me give you another one. Paul Cameron is a commercial cattle feeder from the Imperial Valley. He says, my company employs 32 hardworking men and women. Many of these employees are second and third generation to the livestock business. Our cattle rely primarily on Midwestern-grown corn as their primary source for grain. This is the conflict here. This year, 41% of our nation's corn crop will be used by a heavily subsidized ethanol industry. In a year where nationally our grain inventories have already been reduced by adverse weather, corn has risen in price by 140%. Because of this, any chance of profitability in all protein industries has vanished. The cattle industry, the inventory in our own operation is being reduced, and we have begun the process of laying off many of our employees. Coming from a county with 27.9% unemployment, that's April EDD figures, these good, hard-working people will be relegated to trying to find jobs where there are none. And these are the very people that take great pride in the fact that they not only feed a nation, but they also feed the world. This is what this is doing. This is actual testimony read verbatim. Then we have a letter from the American Meat Institute, California Dairies, National Chicken Council, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, National Meat Association, National Pork Producers Council, National Turkey Federation, essentially saying the same thing. Corn-based ethanol has distorted the corn market and stretched corn supplies to the point production costs have increased significantly. Additionally, the current import tariff on foreign sources of ethanol harms United States consumers by retarding the development of a robust and sustainable biofuels market. That's a direct quote. And I would ask unanimous consent to put this testimony in the record.
Without objection.
Following my remarks. Thank you. And then there is a whole list, a very long list, in a letter to Senators Reid and McConnell from a couple dozen agencies, both agricultural and environmental. And I would put those in as well.
Without objection.
Thank you. The Western United Dairymen's Association, and from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association.
Without objection.
Now, I do this not because I want to run through it all, but because I think it's evidentiary testimony to what is happening out there because of what is very bad and egregious public policy. And at a time of debt and deficit, where we are looking to find a bipartisan solution, which is going to be very, very difficult, and if we reach one, have a dramatic impact on this nation, to continue a program which costs in the tens of billions of dollars makes no sense to me at all. This summer, experts are predicting a mass slaughter of hogs. The USDA predicts that U.S. corn reserves will sink to their lowest level since the mid-90s this summer, and rising food prices are contributing to global poverty and instability. So we are faced with a vote today that is very simple. The vote says, end this trifecta of subsidy, mandate, and protective tariff. And it says, don't wait for it to expire at the end of the year, but do it as of July 1. And if we do it as of July 1, we produce approximately $2.7 billion to the Treasury to ameliorate debt and deficit. So this is, I think, an easy $2.7 billion to save. Now, someone might say, well, what are you doing to all of the producers of ethanol? Shouldn't we protect them? Well, this has been going on for a very long time, from 2005. To have an industry develop that becomes dependent on this trifecta of subsidy, mandate, and protective tariff is only going to increase costs. I understand beginning an industry with some help, giving them a leg up, giving them a toehold, A toehold becomes a foothold, and then they go on their own. But what the ethanol industry wants is a continuation of the subsidy to the oil companies. Oil companies, the most profitable industry in the United States. Continue the subsidy to it, continue the mandate, and continue to protect it. And you can be sure, if we don't do this now, and we wait for it to end at the end of 2012, there will be a fight to continue it. Well, we're all talking about saying no. We're all talking about that the time has come when we have to do business differently. And we have a lot of major problems out there. And we have a lot of people that need help. Would I rather help those people, or would I rather help big oil do essentially what they're mandated to do anyway? The choice is easy. The choice is clear. Would I want to continue a high protective tariff on the least environmentally friendly commodity, which is corn ethanol? It's not even algae. It's not cellulosic. It's not sugar cane. It is the least environmentally friendly production of ethanol. Now, Mr. President, I have opposed this from the beginning because I'm not that prescient, to be honest with you, but I just knew that once we started this, it wasn't going to end. That once we started it, it was going to be more, more, more. And that's the ground beat. That's the sound beat. And if we can settle it in the next few hours with a proposal that meets the strictures of both sides of this great institution, we are trying to do that. But there are people that strongly believe it should be ended quickly. And that's what this vote, this cloture vote this afternoon, will show. We recognize it. We recognize that it can be blue-slipped. However, it would be the first consequential vote of the United States Senate to say that major subsidies to oil companies to do what you are mandated to do has come to an end. And protective tariffs of the least environmentally friendly source of ethanol will come to an end. And they will come to an end in a timely way, which is what the government should be doing. So I would like to yield the floor at this time, and I would like to very much, I know this has been tough. The big surprise to me has been how emotional our caucus on the Democratic side has been, and I understand the other side's caucus, the Republican side, was emotional as well. So this appears to be much more major than the legislation itself might send a signal of. But I am very hopeful that we will have 60 votes, which should send a very loud message from the United States Senate. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. President, thank you. And I also want to say to the Senator from California, many of the points that you've made, I came back here for the purpose of addressing our overspending. And that involves all kinds of tax expenditures. It involves all kinds of subsidies. It's necessary because of our current debt situation and deficit situation. We've got to get control of this. It's the only reason I ran. It's the only reason I'm back here, with a commitment from the people of Indiana who supported me that, yes, this is what needs to be done in Washington. And so I'm not here to criticize Senator Coburn's, Senator Feinstein's efforts and others' efforts to begin to address these subsidies. And that is exactly what we need to do. I think the Senator's phrase, "this is what we're doing in a timely way," really goes to the heart and the essence of where I believe we need to go. We have subsidized, for I think some valid reasons early on, the production of ethanol, because we said we are not independent in terms of our energy production here. And our dependence on oil, and particularly Middle Eastern oil, is not only costly to us from the standpoint of OPEC setting the price of oil worldwide based on their output, but also on the fact that we spend a lot of money in blood and treasure to continue our dependence on that oil by the placing of troops in the Middle East, by the engagements that they had. Because would anybody think that we would pay nearly as much attention to the Middle East as we are now, were it not for the fact that the oil supply that comes there is absolutely necessary for our economy and the world economy? But we all recognize, and I think everyone in this chamber would simply say that, yes, we want less dependence on foreign sources and more independence. And so the production of homegrown energy out of corn or other products that are grown in the soil and can be converted to a form of energy blended with oil so that we use less of Middle Eastern oil, more of our own resources to drive our trucks and to drive our cars and to fuel our planes is a valid goal. Now, to get that started, I wasn't here, but Congress passed a set of subsidies in order to encourage that industry. And on the basis of that, states, private entities, public-private partnerships committed to going forward with production of ethanol. We're at a point now where there is essentially agreement that this subsidy has to be phased out. The question and taken away, and the producers of ethanol agree. Maybe it's political reality, for whatever it is. As I spoke to ethanol producers across my state, I basically said, we cannot continue this subsidy under our current situation of debt, and it has always been designed to become economically feasible, and it would be related to the price of oil. Well, the price of oil has gone up, and I think it gives ethanol producers a more level playing field on this. The problem of that, many of us from the Midwest have, I'll only speak for myself, but many of us from corn growing and ethanol producing states, and Indiana, by the way, is one of the leading states in the nation. We produce a significant percentage of ethanol, is that this amendment basically says it's over now. We've come together around a transition proposal that Senator Thune has proposed, and I'm all for a straight up and down vote on which is the best way to rid ourselves or to decrease the dependence on this subsidy and to phase it out completely. I can't imagine that anybody here would think that as we address tax code expenditures, that there wouldn't be a transition process in place for eliminating that expenditure for an industry or for an individual in the United States. I joined Senator Wyden, a Democrat, in a bipartisan effort for a comprehensive tax reform. Our proposal basically eliminates most of the tax expenditures, the special provisions, totaling almost $1 trillion. We eliminate that in a way to reduce rates, make our companies more competitive, lower individual rates, simplify the tax code. But we know that in doing so, there has to be a transition period. You just cannot yank away from the private sector or the public-private sector an economic basis on which they went forward and committed to that particular entity and product. And so all we're really asking here for is a transition process. And now I know there's talk about, well, you know, we might give you a vote next week on this and so forth. I don't blame Senator Coburn or Senator Feinstein one bit for using a procedural rule. Actually, Senator Feinstein did not do that and did not support that, and I think deserves a second vote. I don't fault Senator Coburn for using procedural methods, which were, maybe not necessarily something of precedent here, but it is possible under our procedures to do what he did in order to get his vote on the floor. He's been asking for that for weeks, if not months. It is an issue that we ought to be debating, but there ought to be a debate, an honest debate, between essentially the two sides of this issue, both of which agree the subsidy ought to be removed, one of which says we remove it today on this vote. The other one says we remove it over a period of time, 3 years or so, when we ramp it down, and that we take the money that is immediately saved and donate it to reducing the deficit, but we take some of the money in order to transition away from the subsidy. And that's what Senator Thune is trying to do without getting into all the details, which I don't need to do. Really what I'm here to do is to plead for an opportunity to debate both sides of this, to have two votes, winner take all. That's the way it works here, and the chips fall where they may. But at least we will have had an honest debate about two alternatives to try to reach the same goal. One takes a longer period of time than the other, and the Senate will vote, and the yeas will be yea, and the nays will be nay, and the yeas will prevail, and we'll move forward on that basis. All we have now is a promise that maybe we'll give you an opportunity to bring something up next week so that we can vote on the phase-out program. Some members will say, hey, this is great. I can vote for both. And then I can go home and say, yes, we need to eliminate this subsidy. That's why I voted for Senator Coburn. Then they can also say, and the following week I voted for Senator Thune. One of these should work. We've got it both ways. Look, we should make a distinction between which way we want to go and what we want to do. I've happened to choose, for I think valid reasons, that we ought to transition out of this because the enormous financial commitment that has been made on the part of ethanol producers in my state, because of the enormous benefit that, yes, has come to our agriculture sector that has grown a lot of corn and benefited from it and has paid a lot of taxes. It's one of the few industries in America right now that is prospering, earning revenue and paying taxes on that revenue and helping our economy grow, as is the ethanol industry. But to just yank it away from them right away because we say this has to be done right now without any transition, I don't think is fair to all of those who have made that commitment. Does ethanol need to be economically viable to compete with other forms of energy? Yes. Did it need, and this, I wasn't here again, but this body of Congress, including the administration, said it needed a head start so that we can reduce our dependence on foreign oil. And they gave them that in the form of these subsidies, in the form of a tariff, in the form of some credits. Have we come to the point financially where we now need to look at this as well as hundreds of others, subsidies and tax expenditures that we simply no longer can afford? And the answer to that is yes. We've come to that point. But is the best way to do this, particularly in this instance, when there's more than just an interest for one company or two companies here that you find in so much of the tax code, but where there is a national security interest in this, where our military says our continued dependence on foreign sources of oil is a national security issue, affecting our troops, affecting our expenditures, affecting our deployments, where these people need to go to keep the sea lanes open, to keep the oil flowing, and so forth. And so there is a national basis on which we need to have competing forms of energy that can lessen that dependence, and ethanol is one of those. But yes, does it need to be economically viable? Absolutely. How do we get there? We can get there by pulling the rug out from them now, shutting it down, seeing precipitous drops in the amount of ethanol, drop in ethanol production because it's no longer economically viable. Or we can put in place, as Senator Thune has tried to do, and the coalition of us that support that, we can put in place a sensible way to reduce this subsidy to zero, to bring ethanol to a point of economic viability on its own that can immediately send a significant amount of money to the $1 billion to reduce the deficit, and can be part of the transition to allow ethanol to be an economically viable part of our ability to provide transportation energy without having to call up the Middle East and say, keep sending it, and by the way, we'll send our troops, we'll send our money, we'll send our treasure over because we absolutely have to have this to drive our economy. So I think there's compelling reason to allow the Thune amendment to be here on the floor, debated, and to give members an opportunity to debate and make their case on each side, take a vote, and we'll let the chips fall where they may, but we will at least have had the courage to stand up and honestly say, this is where I come down, this is what I stand for, and then the voters can decide whether they like that or not like that. But it makes sense, I think, from an economic standpoint, it makes sense from an energy independence standpoint, it makes sense, just common sense, that anybody who has been encouraged by this body to invest in this product to reduce our dependence on oil, to at least give them a chance to phase this thing down so that they don't necessarily put a padlock on the refining plants and basically say we're out of business. That doesn't achieve the goal, the very reason that this body put these enhancements and subsidies in place in the first place. Conclusion, we need to phase out this subsidy. There are other subsidies and other expenditures out there that we can eliminate now without having this kind of adverse economic effect and without having a negative effect on our national security. But this is not one of them. And so I urge my colleagues and I urge the leadership to allow the pleas of Senator Thune and others of us to be heard so that we have an honest debate, an honest choice, and then we accept the results. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor and I believe suggest the evidence of the quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr.